Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavai Tejasvinavaditamastu Mavidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om, may the divine being look over us lovingly as a mother and father. May the divine being support and nourish us as a mother and father. May we have the strength and skill to study together the art of spirituality. May no misunderstandings arise amongst us. Om, peace, peace. Peace be unto thee, unto us, and to all beloved beings everywhere. Om Hari Om Tat Sat. So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Namaste. Welcome to our reading and discussion of Divine Grace, a charming small book by Swami Ranganathananda. We're just about finished with the book, but who knows how much longer it will take us, because we often get into some very spirited discussions based on what the Swami tells us, which is exactly the purpose of one of these classes, of course, is these spirited discussions, studying the art of spirituality together. So, is there anything before we start, anything that anyone would like to bring up that is either a leftover from previous sessions or just something that's been on your mind that you would like to discuss? All right. Jeff, please read on.
When we left off, we had read a lengthy quotation by Silvano Arietti, and we decided that we were going to go ahead and repeat that this morning.
Okay.
So, quite a long one, but I'll pause briefly between paragraphs, and if somebody wants to leap out there, then please do. Silvano Arietti gives a few suggestions for the cultivation of creativity. It is well known that creative people appear in particularly large numbers in certain periods of history in given geographical areas. This uneven distribution seems to indicate that special environmental circumstances, and not exclusively biological factors, determine the occurrence of creativity. Studies made independently by several authors have determined that highly intelligent persons are not necessarily highly creative. Although creative people are intelligent persons, an exceptionally high IQ is not a prerequisite for creativity. On the contrary, it may inhibit the inner resources of the individual because of too rigid self-criticism or too quick learning of what the cultural environment has to offer. We must add that a great ability to deduce according to the laws of logic and mathematics makes for disciplined thinkers, but not necessarily for creative people. The science of promoting creativity is in its initial stages. The author can suggest only rudimentary and tentative notions deduced from his psychoanalytic psychotherapeutic treatment of a relatively large number of creative people. In the present chapter, we have seen how the use of primitive forms of cognition is a prerequisite for many forms of creativity. We certainly do not advocate a fostering of psychopathology for the enhancement of creativity. Some people have tried to do so pharmacologically by means of alcohol, opium derivatives, and more recently by lysergic acid diethylamide. These are methods that a psychiatrist cannot recommend. In addition to the danger of addiction, their value as promoters of creativity is more than doubtful. If it is true that they facilitate the reemergence of the primary process, they impair the use of the secondary process, and we have seen that creativity, or tertiary process, emerges only by a harmonious matching of the two processes. Instead of resorting to toxic procedures, we must consider and possibly recommend special attitudes, habits, and environmental conditions. The first condition to be considered is aloneness. Aloneness may be viewed as a partial sensory deprivation. He has more possibility of listening to his inner self, to come in contact with his inner resources, and with some manifestations of the primary process. Unfortunately, aloneness is not advocated in our modern forms of educating adolescents. On the contrary, gregariousness and popularity are held in high esteem. I'd like to pause here just to comment that last night I saw the movie Maestro, which is about Leonard Bernstein.
Mm-hmm.
And they reenacted an interview that he did with Edward R. Murrow, and in it he was asked about the contrast of Leonard Bernstein, the composer, versus Leonard Bernstein, the performer and conductor. And so he talked about how in performing and conducting, you are very out there. You're communicating with your audience, and you're doing whatever you can to display your talents outwardly to communicate with your audience. Whereas as a composer, it's a very solitary, quiet, internal process.
Yes.
And I thought that was very well said, and it ties right into what we're reading about this morning. So I just wanted
Precisely. That quality of aloneness must be, it is a prerequisite for creative endeavor. You must know how to be alone with yourself and your gifts. Then they will, as has been brought out, the primary and secondary processes, the left and right brain processes, the right brain processes, the left brain processes, will help generate and form the creative act. Now, whether it be a painting or a poem or a symphony, whatever it is. I mean, if you listen to Leonard Bernstein's and Stephen Sondheim's West Side Story, what an act of creative genius that is. And they did it together, which is even more remarkable. So, yes, to what you just said.
So reading on. Okay, reading on. Aloneness should not be confused with painful loneliness or with withdrawal or constant solitude. A second characteristic which seems to promote creativity is one which is contrary to the present spirit of American culture: inactivity. By inactivity, of course, we do not mean schizophrenic withdrawal or catatonic immobility or excessive loafing, but the allowing of periods of time during which the person is permitted to do nothing at an overt behavior level. If a person must always focus his attention on external work, he decreases the possibility of expanding his inner resources. Here again, American upbringing promotes an opposite attitude. Excessive routine activities stifle mental activity and creativity. The third characteristic is daydreaming. It is in daydream life that the individual permits himself to diverge from the usual ways and to make little excursions into irrational worlds. Another requirement for the creative person is even more difficult to accept: gullibility. This word is used here to mean the willingness to accept, at least temporarily or until proved wrong, that there are certain underlying orderly arrangements in everything outside us and inside us. Creativity often implies the discovery of these underlying orderly arrangements more than inventing of new things. Alertness and discipline are the other requirements.
Now, I'm
Although,
going to interrupt for just a moment.
certainly,
For example, it's well known among poets that in English, the metric scheme for poetry called iambic pentameter is not an invention of human beings. It seems to be built in. It seems to be built in to the characteristics of our language. So iambic pentameter, which has been so much used in metrical forms of poetry. There are other forms of meter, of course, but that seems to be simply built in and have to do with the rhythms of the heart and the mind. So many songs, so many poems are written in iambic pentameter. And it seems to be a natural, the reason it's so acceptable to our ear is that it is so generated by natural processes. So if you could go back a couple of sentences to put that in context, Jeff, that would be kind.
let me find where that would be. I'll repeat the last paragraph. I think that captures it. Another requirement for the creative process is even more difficult to accept: gullibility. This word is used here to mean the willingness to accept, at least temporarily or until proved wrong, that there are certain underlying orderly arrangements in everything outside us and inside us. Creativity often implies the discovery of these underlying orderly arrangements more than the inventing of new things. So is that what you were referring to,
Exactly.
brother? Okay.
That's exactly what I was discussing. Yes.
So in other languages, are other forms of meter more prevalent because?
Oh, yes. In the Indian languages, for the languages of India, for example, there are something called ragas, and they are metric and sonic forms that express various times of day, various moods. It's a very formal study of this, not invented, but recognized form of metrical and sonic expression. Native American music also has some profound, anyone who's ever listened to the singing, flute playing, and drumming of Native Americans will hear the inherent metrical forms that they use. Again, it's remarkable and very winning to the heart. So yes, other languages have different metrical forms. The Greeks had very organized metrical forms for their poetry.
I've also heard that these same underlying rhythms and structures of language influence how we think.
Oh, yes. Yes. The structures come first, and then it evolves into our thinking, and that thinking may evolve into creativity.
So we have one more paragraph in this quotation. Alertness and discipline are other requirements. Although they are necessary prerequisites for productivity in general, they acquire a particular aspect in creativity. Many would-be creative persons, especially in the artistic fields, would like to believe that only such qualities as imagination, inspiration, intuition, and talent are important. They are reluctant to submit themselves to the rigor of learning techniques, discipline, or logical thinking on the pretext that all these things would stultify their creativity. A humorous remark which has by now become commonplace, but in which there is a great deal of metaphorical truth, is that creativity is 10% inspiration and 90% perspiration.
Which was what Thomas Edison said. He affirmed that. He said, and he also said, and others have said, the first requisite is showing up, getting there to begin and continue the work. Do the 90% perspiration.
In looking this over, as a somewhat creative person on occasion, I know Cindy is a musician and songwriter. I'm not much of a songwriter, but I've had a couple of occasions where songs have been kind of delivered to me in the dream state or in the near dream state. I've either had entire chord progressions worked out for me, and here you go, Jeff, or lyrics or ideas for songs. And otherwise, I relate to, I can't find the quote, I relate to excessive loafing. I'm kind of lazy when it comes to songwriting. And so I've had songs given to me in dream, and that has to be some kind of contact I'm making with.
Well, it's a very fine line between the loafing and the dreaming, in which in the dream we simply are present and wait to see what arises. Amazing things arise. Albert Einstein was a master of finding cues and clues in that state between waking and dreaming, waking and being fully asleep. You can read that in the biographies of Einstein. And of course, there are others. And right now, scientists are baffled at what the James Webb Telescope has revealed to them about the nature of the early universe and the fact that it can't possibly have been the Big Bang, which was the answer for so many years. It has to be something else. And so they're trying to be of the mind that will develop an answer to what they're seeing. It's truly remarkable. We'll talk a little bit about that tomorrow.
Maybe it's the big boing.
Can you define that, Cindy?
I don't know, it just came to me. Um,
A
I
big
wanted
boom.
the big boing, boing, boing. Anyway, I did want to comment a little bit on this creativity thing, and you know, there's a lot to be said if you are a creative person who wants to cultivate your creativity. There's a lot to be said for boredom, and idleness, and you know, loafing, as Jeff called it. And generally our culture is just the opposite and tells you those things are bad. And unfortunately, it's resulted in these parents today overscheduling their children so that they have no idleness. And you know, I remember when I was a free range child of the 60s and 70s growing up, especially being a kid in the 60s, you know, going off all day long. We didn't have any, you know, if we may have had a bicycle to get a little farther away from home on. But that was it. And we would just get together and we would get bored. And that boredom, in that moment of boredom, something would come up. And children, as well as adults anymore, don't have enough of that open space in their schedules to just be and to have to get bored. And then, you know, the mind want the mind wants something to do, and
Yes.
the body wants something to do, and so it will start to create things, but not if it's like bombarded all the time with entertainment. And anyway,
No,
soapbox.
I so agree. Free range child. I so related to that. That, when I was 9 years old, I'd get on my bicycle and I'd ride over to the railroad tracks where there was this great big California red pepper tree. And I would climb up as far in that tree as I could climb and just sit there and let my mind wander over, thinking about where the trains went and, what was coming in on the trains, what was being unloaded from them, produce, furniture, all these amazing things coming from distant places. And it was just delightful. And it's one of the reasons, I'm convinced it's one of the reasons that I became a writer later on, is that I was able to just let my mind go and experience that wonder and that sense of exclamation over what I was seeing. So later, when I discovered what writing was about 4 years later, I discovered what writing was in a library, um, in a little private library. And it just took off from there. But I so agree with you, Cindy. I so agree with you. When parents these days don't allow their children to be free range, they're depriving them. And it's a darn shame.
I think the cell phone is a very hinders that a great deal. During the height of the pandemic, I went to Emory because for the vaccination, and I would be sitting there with like 200 different people. After you wait to make sure you don't have a reaction, and I noticed that I was always the only person not on a phone.
Yeah.
And people ask me, how do you leave your house without a phone? It freaks them out. And I say, easy, we didn't have phones when we were kids. It's like what Cindy was talking about. You'd get in trouble for not coming home. When you're a kid, you'd leave out on your bike or whatever, and you were supposed to be home by dark or dinner time. And that was it.
Yeah.
And, your minds, we'd go to the abandoned lot or whatever, and, we had to use our imagination.
Yes.
And sometimes we'd get into trouble, but you know, we learned things. You know, it's how you learn. I feel like
Yes.
people are like, don't want my kid to experience life and make mistakes. I want everything to be perfect. Um,
I
But
think that's fine. We're seeing some of the things we're seeing is because it's an atrophy of that process of the cause and effect, understanding that you should have.
that
yes,
tertiary process that the philosopher was talking about, you know, that part that's missing.
mhm,
And I think this overscheduling not only stifles creativity, but it also stifles opportunities for insight that would explain why, as a whole, people are less interested in religion and spirituality than they used to be. They don't have time to think about such things.
It's interesting because, you know, spirituality on one hand requires the stopping of thoughts, and on the other hand, it requires intense analysis, repeatedly. But when a kid grows up, when they're constantly busy the whole time, they don't have a minute to stop. You know that that ability to stop, I think, gets lost. Like my dad, he can't stop. He cannot sit down. He has to be, fooling with all his motorcycles and boats and going. He works at playing, and it reminds me of the thing, where is one of the stories, where the guy gets a kitten and then he decides he needs a cow to make milk for the kitten, and then, he's got to, make grow food for the cow, and then he needs some kids to work the farm, and he gets married and has kids, and the way it just proliferates out, you know.
mhm.
Should have stopped with just the kitten.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of what it was talking about, you roast, the roasted seeds in what we were talking about the other night about they don't sprout, they're just a one-time thing, and they don't proliferate and germinate, all that, So it's like you have to pay attention to things in the mind that start proliferating distractions.
Yes, what is auspicious and what is not.
I was kind of thinking about this the fifth category, alertness and discipline. And I was kind of thinking about, I know brother talked about Indian music and ragas. And when Indian musicians play, especially the Hindustani style or the Carnatic style, they don't have fixed music written. They're improvising.
Mhm,
But in their journey to getting to be able to improvise, the way they practice, and I know because I trained a little bit with it, is that you actually have very fixed pattern of how you come down the octave and how you get up on the octave.
mhm,
And you may, in your aloneness, which is the first characteristic of the five, you may, in your aloneness, be just doing the arrow or up row, which is how you come down the octave and how you get up in the octave, in very fixed pattern for the next 12 years. But
mhm,
that prepares you into a situation where you have no music written. You have these fixed structural things called ragas, but then you're improvising over improvisation over improvisation. And some days you may be at the peak of your craft and you may actually surprise yourself with the improvisations. And some other day, because this is not written, you may not really flower that much of improvisation. So again, the number one and number five really make deep sense here as far as creativity is concerned, especially with Indian music.
Speaking of Indian music, I had the great good fortune one time of hearing Ali Akbar Khan give some instruction to a student about what to practice. And of course, there was a mystery to me what he was saying. He was saying it in an Indian language for a start. But, he was telling him, you practice this. And he meant for a long time. You get, to where you can do this. Because, creative people like to jump ahead. And he was not scolding him, but just correcting him and saying, no, you practice this. And it was a remarkable moment, and I remember it to this day. So there we are. It's, all of these things are necessary for the flowering, and it is a flowering of creativity. It starts as a seed, grows into a plant, develops a bud, the bud opens and flowers, and you have the creative act. And then the seeds go on and proliferate unless you roast them. Anything else from anyone? All right, dears, let's read on.
So that concluded that long quotation and that section. So now we're at section 23 at near the top of page 73. The section is called The Struggle to Become Grace-Worthy. All these steps outlined by Silvano Arietti to foster creativity already form integral parts of meditation and other sadhanas or spiritual practices, of the dynamic spirituality of the science of religion, the science of the spiritual growth of man, as contrasted with the static and formal piety of all ethnical religions. In life generally, and in spiritual life particularly, Sri Ramakrishna refers to the need on the part of the seeker to strive to obtain the grace not only of God, but also of one's own mind. To emphasize this, and it needs much emphasis, he used to recite a familiar saying of the Bengal Vaishnava tradition. The English translation is, "The grace of the three, namely Guru, Krishna or God, and fellow devotees, I have I amply received, but for not obtaining the grace of one, that is, one's own mind, my life has gone to the dogs." I'm going to go ahead and repeat that since I was slightly inaccurate there. The grace of the three, namely Guru, Krishna or God, and fellow devotees, I have amply received, but for not obtaining the grace of one, that is, one's own mind, my life has gone to dogs. So when you build up your strength of individuality and self-reliance and character strength from your young days, you are already catching that wind of grace, and you are getting steadily stronger and purer to appreciate it and benefit from it. And you become strongest when you surrender all your strength to that great breeze of grace that blows all the time. For he alone is. We are only just a spark of that divine fire. We have not to run after, to pine after divine grace. We only have to become grace-worthy. And that grace-worthiness is what one gets by achieving manliness through a life of self-reliance, hard work, and struggle to develop character strength. This takes us closer and closer to that final spiritual revolution in total surrender, prapati or saranagati. Hope I'm saying those right. When the mind is dominated by nature's powers of tamas and rajas, saranagati or self-surrender, if practiced, will not be genuine. It is best then to practice purushakara or self-reliance, accompanied by a general feeling of devotion and dedication to God. But when the mind rises to the level of sattva, or even sattva-dominated rajas, it gets the capacity for self-surrender and the appreciation of divine grace. It is at this level that bhakti shines at its purest and best. and human life reaches the level of spontaneity, naturalness, and effortlessness. The Srimad Bhagavatam gives a beautiful picture of such a life in its exposition of the nature of a Bhagavatam, Bhagavatatama?
Actually, Bhagavatottama.
Bhagavatottama.
Bhagavatot.
Thank you, Haima.
Sure.
And I'll need help again in just a couple of words. The best among the devotees by the Navayogindras?
Navayogindras, yes.
Navayogindras.
Navayogindras, yes, Navayogindras.
So the English translation, so he gives several verses here, and I'll just read the English translations. He is the best among the devotees of Hari, or God, who seeks the blessed Lord as the self in all beings, and all beings in the blessed Lord as their self. Let me read that again.
Yeah, notice that it's two sides of one coin.
He is the best among the devotees of Hari, or God, who sees the blessed Lord as the self in all beings, and all beings in the blessed Lord as their self. He is a middling type of devotee who practices love towards God, friendship toward his devotees, compassion towards childish or ignorant people, and indifference toward enemies. Let me read that again. He is a middling type of devotee who practices love towards God, friendship towards his devotees, compassion towards childish or ignorant people, and indifference toward enemies. He is an ordinary type of devotee who seeks to worship God with faith only in an image or idol, but not in his devotees or others. And repeating that one. He is an ordinary type of devotee who seeks to worship God with faith only in an image or idol, but not in his devotees or others.
I'd like to note that there's no recrimination or judgment here. This is simply classification. The superior, the middling, and the ordinary. So you can find yourself wherever you find yourself. And if you're satisfied, they're fine. If not, then make the effort to climb into the higher category. And he's made clear what it is that is required to move into a higher category.
And so these are categories listed in ascending order.
Yes.
He is best among the devotees of God who sees this universe as the Maya of Vishnu, the all-pervading Lord, even while experiencing its objects through his sense organs. Repeating, he is the best among the devotees of God who sees this universe as the Maya of Vishnu, or the all-pervading Lord, even while experiencing its objects through his sense organs. He is the preeminent devotee who, through his constant remembrance of Hari, does not get deluded by the characteristics of the world, such as birth, death, hunger, thirst, fear, cravings, and hardships affecting the body, sense organs, vital energies, mind, and intellect. And repeating that one, he is the preeminent devotee who, through his constant remembrance of Hari, does not get deluded by the characteristics of the world, such as birth, death, hunger, thirst, fear, cravings, and hardships affecting the body, sense organs, vital energies, mind, and intellect. He verily is the best among the devotees who, ever residing only in Vasudeva or Hari, does not experience the emergence of even the seeds of sense cravings and craving satisfying actions in his mind. Repeating that, he verily is the best among the devotees who, ever residing only in Vasudeva or Hari, does not experience the emergence of even the seeds of sense cravings and craving satisfying actions in his mind. He indeed is dear to Hari, who is not attached to the notions such as birth, actions, caste, order of life, etc., centered in this body. And again, he indeed is dear to Hari, who is not attached to the notions such as birth, actions, caste, order of life, etc., etc., centered in this body. And one more verse. He indeed is the best among the devotees who does not entertain in his mind distinctions such as this is one's own, this is an outsider or foreigner, and who is peaceful and looks upon all beings with equal mindedness. And repeating this verse, he indeed is the best among the devotees who does not entertain in his mind distinctions such as this is one's own, this is an outsider or foreigner, and who is peaceful and looks upon all beings with equal mindedness. So now this is the Swami speaking. Every devotee is inspired by this truth when truly comprehended that there is God's grace available to him or her. That is what will carry him or her onward in life thereafter, in a beautiful and natural and rewarding blending of self-effort and divine grace until the flood of divine grace engulfs the devotee. When people understand religion correctly as the science of total human unfoldment, they will realize that there is no gulf between man's external life and man's internal life, between man's secular life and man's spiritual life. External and internal are only formal expressions. Life or reality knows no separation like this. What is external is also internal. Narayana, the indwelling divine, says the Narayana Upanishad, exists filling the inside and the outside of man and the universe. So when you are working in the world, you are working in and through Narayana himself. You are not really away from him. Vedanta says that God is both transcendent and immanent. He is within as well as without. Sri Ramakrishna told Vivekananda, "Learn to see God with eyes closed as well as with eyes open, with eyes closed in meditation and with eyes open during work and interhuman relations." And that concludes that section.
Wonderful. If we are listening to what the Swami is saying, we cannot but be deeply encouraged. Engulfed. Notice the use of the word engulfed. Engulfed means surrounded on every side. All four sides, above, below, you're engulfed. It's as if you're in the water above your head. Engulfed. And so it's meant to be entirely reassuring and encouraging. Any other thoughts or comments from anyone? Okay, please read on.
We have only one more short section, so it looks like we are indeed going to wrap up this book today.
Good.
Section 24, entitled Conclusion. So in the early stages of one's life, when one is dealing with the world, one is actually in touch with the divine as well. She or he doesn't know it yet, but that awareness will dawn depending upon how one handles one's life. And this truth will dawn fully on him or her when that great strength gained by one's self-reliance and self-effort is able to go beyond itself to a still greater strength, the strength which is self-surrender to the divine. This is the only occasion when surrender becomes supreme victory. The knowledge dawns that the breeze of divine grace has been gently carrying forward his or her little boat of individuality on the waters of life towards the ocean of total fulfillment. This also means that life and action continue even after self-surrender, but now naturally and spontaneously and effortlessly as an instrument of the divine for the good of the world. So in Vedanta it is said, even to turn towards God or towards striving for liberation, man needs his grace. Only through grace of God do you get even this tendency towards spirituality, this thirst for the highest. Blaise Pascal, the mathematician mystic of the 17th century, felt Lord Jesus telling him, I love thee more ardently than thou lovest thine abominations or sins. Thou wouldst not seek me if thou didst not possess me. Be not therefore troubled. I'd like to read that quotation one more time.
Please.
I love thee more ardently than thou lovest thine abominations or sins. Thou wouldst not seek me if thou didst not possess me. Be not therefore troubled. Seeking is also finding, because it is what is sought for is also the highest truth within us. That is the way grace operates in human life, but we fully recognize it only when we become spiritually mature with the strength of manliness leading to the strength of godliness or saintliness in total surrender. Then, from that height, one can say, my play is done. Now I see the truth. Everything was and is divine grace. Personal effort and self-surrender to the divine are not only the earlier and later phases of man's spiritual life in divine grace. Something seems to be missing from that sentence. Let me read that one again. Personal effort and self-surrender to the divine are only the earlier and later phases of man's spiritual life in divine grace. I wish all of you complete success in your spiritual training, growth, and fulfillment from manliness to godliness, from manliness to saintliness. That is the complete philosophy of life, and that is the yoga of the Gita. And that concludes it.
Okay, well, what I'd like you to do, since this is the Swami's closing argument, I'd like you to go back and read that last section. All that we'll close at the end of that. We won't take up the other book until next week. But just go ahead and just read it straight through, slowly and with emphasis. This is the Swami's closing argument and his utter and unreserved reassurance about our future if we lean into this as he has invited us to do.
Section 24, the conclusion. So, in the early stages of one's life, when one is dealing with the world, one is actually in touch with the divine as well. She or he doesn't know it yet, but that awareness will dawn depending upon how one handles one's life. And this truth will dawn fully on him or her when that great strength gained by one's self-reliance and self-effort is able to go beyond itself to a still greater strength, the strength which is self-surrender to the divine. This is the only occasion when surrender becomes supreme victory. The knowledge dawns that the breeze of divine grace has been gently carrying onward his or her little boat of individuality on the waters of life towards the ocean of total fulfillment. This also means that life and action continue even after self-surrender, but now naturally and spontaneously and effortlessly, and as an instrument of the divine and for the good of the world. So in Vedanta it is said, even to turn towards God or towards surviving for liberation, man needs his grace. Only through grace of God do you get even this tendency toward spirituality, this thirst for the highest. Blaise Pascal, the mathematician mystic of the 17th century, felt Lord Jesus telling him, I love thee more ardently than thou lovest thine abominations or sin. Thou wouldst not seek me if thou didst not possess me. Be not therefore troubled. Seeking is also finding, because what is sought for is also the highest truth within us. That is the way grace operates in human life. But we fully recognize it only when we become spiritually mature, with the strength of manliness leading to the strength of godliness or saintliness in total self-surrender. Then, from that height, one can say, my play is done. Now I see the truth. Everything was and is divine grace. Personal effort and self-surrender to the divine are only the earlier and later phases of man's spiritual life in divine grace. I wish all of you complete success in your spiritual training, growth, and fulfillment from manliness to godliness, from manliness to saintliness. That is a complete philosophy of life, and that is the yoga of the Gita.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So any final thought, question or concern from anyone? Anything at all before we close?
I just love the concept that it's been grace that has been carrying us all along.
Yes.
We may not know it, but that's been what's happening. And now through what we're doing here, we're starting to realize it.
Yes. And pushing us toward what? The ocean of fulfillment. Of fulfillment. What a grand word is that. Fulfillment. To be fulfilled. Amen. So tomorrow morning, we will talk on the subject Mysterium Tremendum, the great mystery. Why should there be a universe at all? All these things that are now concerning not only us as spiritual aspirants, but also because of the amazing findings of the latest astrophysical instruments. It's called into question everything that has been assumed for so many decades about why the universe exists. It's an intriguing time to be alive because well, we'll talk about it. Anything else from anyone before we close?
I'd just like to say thanks to Jeff for being our reader.
Amen. Well done, Jeff.
It's my pleasure. I have something to offer folks. The next thing we're going to study is Christ the Messenger by Swami Vivekananda, and it's concluded in the Complete Works, and I've taken my PDF, my very long PDF of that publication, which I think Brother Shankara provided to me, and I have done some computer trickery, and I've produced a PDF document that just contains those few pages of Christ the Messenger. So if anyone is interested in that, if we can keep our Zoom connection open for a few minutes, send me your email in the chat, and then before we close, I can save all that info and send you the document, and it'll be easy to follow it that way.
Very good, and thank you, Jeff. Thank you for your computer wizardry and your computer capability.
My computer wizardry is strictly on a part-time basis, but I get lucky sometimes.
So I had kind of curious, this topic, divine grace. Is there another book or on a similar topic within the Vedanta Press or anything else, brother, that you can recommend?
Well, I always go right to the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, because Sri Ramakrishna talks about divine grace in one way or another in virtually every section of that book, because that is what he recognizes as generative of his own spiritual appearance, his own sadhana, his own spiritual journey, and what it resulted in, and what it offers us. So that for a start. Then there is a book called Narada's Bhakti Sutras. Now, bhakti is much misunderstood. I won't go into the nature of the misunderstanding. Most people think it is simple, and it is relatively more simple than the other three yogas. But it is not simple. So Narada's Bhakti Sutras is a book to read about the nature of the path that Sri Ramakrishna recommends as absolutely the most advantageous and auspicious for this time to be, being alive. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it did. Thank you.
And those two books, if you read them, particularly if you read the Gospel, it is so uplifting, so uplifting. Sri Ramakrishna came for no other reason than to unchain us and set us free. To unchain us and set us free. This is exactly what Vivekananda wrote about him in Breaker of This World's Chain. And it is And he says that that was as natural an event as the sun rising because of the rotation of the earth. So we can take great solace and look forward to great fulfillment in our relationship with Sri Ramakrishna. Okay.
Brother,
Anything?
Brother Shankara, this is Prema. I have one book that is called The Grace Divine. It's printed in India, Mylapore, Madras, 1983 version, old book. I think it's my dad's. It has a Sri Ramakrishna on grace, Holy Mother on divine grace, Swami Vivekananda on divine grace. It gives so many chapters, about 20 chapters, small chapters. And that's
Very good. Is it still in print?
yeah, it's called The Grace Divine, Sri Ramakrishna Math, Mylapore, Madras. That's where it was printed. I
Well,
don't
there's
Yeah.
another book for anyone.
just to Bhaskarji, who asked for another book. This is
Yeah,
another,
right.
it's a
Yeah.
small book, not very small. It's called Divine Grace, The Grace Divine. It's called
Praise Divine.
Grace
Okay.
Divine. If
All
you
right.
write it down, I don't know whether it's available, but this seems like my dad's. I have it. It's a old everything.
We'll hope that it's still in print.
Yeah.
If it's not in print, of course, the resort you always have is to go to Amazon.
Maybe
And-
on Amazon, probably.
I just checked Vedanta.com, and it's available there. As a matter of fact, it's marked down. It's only $2.95.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, it's a very old book, extremely.
Thank you, Harma, for bringing it.
Ads. Yeah.
Is that Vedanta.com from Hollywood?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
Vedanta.com, and
The
just
Grace Divine.
search for the Grace Divine.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And
It was like 8 rupees in India in those times. It's like a pennies, probably, 1 dime.
Mhm.
well, it's a bargain now because it's 236 pages, and it's
Let me see.
$2.95.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
exactly 236 pages. You're correct. That's the same book I have.
Uh-huh.
It's
And that looks just like the art that's on the website. So
Well, I hope that all of you will be able to secure a copy of Christ the Messenger for next week.
Yes.
yeah,
That, again, it may be a small book.
it's very small.
You may believe it'll take us a while to get, because what the Swami taught.
Yeah.
Are there two versions of Christ the Messenger? Because our book is very thick. I don't know who's it by.
There's only one book by Swami Vivekananda, one
That's right.
lecture that he gave in Pasadena in 1900, called Christ the Messenger.
It's about 58 pages.
You won't have a thick book by that name. You may have a book that contains it, but as far as I know, Vivekananda did not write any separate book titled Christ the Messenger. It's just the record of his talk that he gave in Pasadena in 1900.
Yes. Brother Shankara,
Yes.
the evening Aarti is at 5:30 now, right?
You have to look on the website.
No.
I
Yes.
don't do RT from here.
No, I understand. Is it being zoomed also or not?
No.
I'm not sure. Okay.
No, it's not being zoomed at all.
Okay.
And it is at 5:30.
Okay.
Is Balakrishna telling you, because he's the one doing it. So if you want to join him, you go to the chapel. Okay, anything else from anyone?
I just want to pipe up here and say that I've received email addresses from Sunil, Maria, Jen, Balakrishna, Nira, and Bhaskar. So
Wonderful.
So if anyone else wants to send me their email in the chat, I can send you that PDF of the booklet.
Excellent. All right, dears. Oh, Jeff, will you be willing to serve as our reader, start continuing next week?
I was certainly planning on it.
Well, good. I'm glad you were, because you're doing a wonderful job.
Well, you've trained me well, and I don't want to give up now. So,
All right, well, don't give up. A fulfillment is just ahead.
I'm going to
All
quote
right.
you on that.
Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ji Ki Jai. Durga, Durga, Durga. May we be safe. May we be healthy. May we be cheerful. May we have peace of mind. And may the divine being introduced to us as the mother and father of us all, that is introduced in the opening prayer for these sessions. Let us be secure in the knowledge that that divine father, mother has us in its loving and protective embrace. May we be well and in bright spirits. Until tomorrow morning, for those of you who decide to join to hear about Mysterium Tremendum. Until next time.